She walked into that room with flour still on her hands, not because she was careless, not because she didn't prepare, but because she had been up since 4 in the morning filling orders, building something, bleeding for something, and she still showed up. They took one look at her and smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all, and I watched the whole thing happen. I watched them laugh. I watched them dismiss her like she was nobody. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that this woman had already survived things that would have destroyed most people, and she was just getting started. Stay with me for the next few minutes because I promise you, this story is going to stay with you long after it's over. And if you know someone who has ever been underestimated, laughed at, or made to feel like they don't belong in a room they worked hard to walk into, share this with them before this video ends. This one's for them. This one's for her. Her name was Nadia, and this is the story nobody told, because the people who needed to stay quiet stayed quiet. But I was there. I saw it from the beginning, and I'm going to tell you everything. Nadia grew up in a small town in the South, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, but nobody expects much from you. Her grandmother raised her in a house that was more love than luxury. The floors creaked, the windows rattled in the winter, and the heat came from a stove that was old before Nadia was even born. But that kitchen was sacred. Her grandmother cooked in it every single day, and she didn't just cook food, she cooked meaning into everything she made. She used to say, "Baby, whatever you put your hands to, put your whole soul in it." Nadia never forgot that, not once, not ever. She grew up watching her grandmother clean other people's houses during the week and feed half the neighborhood on Sundays. There was no bitterness in that woman, just a quiet, unshakable dignity that Nadia absorbed like sunlight. And when her grandmother passed, the thing she left Nadia wasn't money or property. It was a recipe book, handwritten, stained with years of cooking, and tucked inside the front cover was a note that said, "This is your foundation. Build on it." Nadia became a mother young. Her daughter Ciara was born when Nadia was just 22, and the father was gone before Ciara could say his name. And I want you to understand something. Nadia didn't collapse. She didn't fall apart. She held that baby girl and made a decision in the silence of that hospital room that she was going to give Ciara a life worth living, not just surviving, living. For years, she worked double shifts, waitressing, cleaning offices, taking in alterations when she could. She did whatever it took. Ciara always had what she needed, even when Nadia had nothing left at the end of the day. But here is the thing about Nadia that most people in her neighborhood knew, and the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. This woman could bake. Not in a casual weekend hobby kind of way, in a way that made people stop mid-bite and go quiet, in a way that made grown adults close their eyes. She had taken her grandmother's recipes and built on them, just like the note said, adding her own technique, her own flavors, her own story into every single thing she made. She started small, a batch of sweet potato pound cakes for a neighbor's birthday, then a church fundraiser. Then word spread the way real things always spread, person to person, mouth to mouth, without a single advertisement. Within a year, she had a waiting list for her weekend orders. Within 2 years, she was baking every morning before the sun came up and every night after Ciara went to sleep. She had transformed the kitchen her grandmother would have recognized into something that hummed with purpose and possibility. And for 3 years, 3 quiet, disciplined, focused years, Nadia had been doing something else on top of all of that. She had been studying. Not in a classroom, at her kitchen table after midnight, with a laptop and a library card, and a hunger that no one around her fully understood. She was studying commercial food production, supply chain logistics, franchise law, small business licensing. She was reading case studies on food entrepreneurs who had scaled from their homes to regional brands. She was taking notes, building spreadsheets, drafting a business plan that was more detailed than most things I've ever seen come out of a formal business school. She wasn't dreaming anymore. She was engineering. The meeting was on a Tuesday. I remember because the weather had shifted that week, one of those crisp mornings that feels like the world is paying attention. Nadia had been awake since 4. She had filled 6 large catering orders for a hospital staff appreciation event, packed everything, confirmed delivery, and then gone upstairs, showered, put on the blazer she'd bought secondhand but had tailored to fit her perfectly, and picked up her leather folder, the one with her full business plan inside, printed, tabbed, and color-coded. She had flour on her hands when she left. She noticed it in the car and almost turned back. But she was already running close on time, and she wiped them on a cloth and kept driving. I think about that moment a lot now. The flour on her hands wasn't a flaw, it was evidence. Evidence of how hard she worked. Evidence of how real her business already was. But she walked into that room knowing not everyone would see it that way. The meeting was with a commercial leasing office, a firm that managed several retail and mixed-use properties in the area. Nadia had identified a storefront on a busy corridor, right between a community center and a well-trafficked grocery store. The foot traffic numbers she had pulled were strong. The demographics matched her customer base perfectly. She had run the rent-to-revenue projections 3 different ways. She was ready. The leasing agent's name was Brett. He was the kind of man who had never in his life been made to feel small, and so he had no idea what it cost other people to walk into rooms like that one. He shook her hand the way you shake hands with someone you've already decided not to take seriously. Loose, quick, barely there. There was another man with him, a silent associate, and seated at the side of the table was a woman named Carol. Carol was an investor, well-dressed, well-connected, and carrying the particular air of someone who had never once questioned whether she deserved to be in any room she entered. Nadia introduced herself. She slid the business plan across the table. She began to speak, clearly, confidently, from memory and from conviction, about her brand, her existing customer base, her catering contracts, her growth projections. She was 2 minutes in when Brett interrupted her, not with a question, with a comment to his associate, a low, smirking comment that I won't repeat word for word because it doesn't deserve to be repeated, but the meaning was clear. The meaning was, she doesn't belong here. And then Carol looked up from the business plan, which she hadn't even opened, and said, "Honey, this isn't a church bake sale." The room went small. You know that feeling when the air gets pulled out of a space? That's what happened. Nadia sat very still, and I watched her face do something remarkable. It didn't crumble. It didn't flush. It went calm. The kind of calm that isn't peace. The kind of calm that is decision. She reached into her folder, took out a pen, opened to a blank page in the back of her planner, and wrote 1 sentence. Then she closed it, gathered her documents, thanked them for their time in a voice that was steadier than anyone in that room deserved, and she left. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called after her. Brett said something under his breath as the door closed, and Carol laughed, and that was that. They moved on. They forgot about her before she even reached the elevator. But I didn't forget. And more importantly, neither did Nadia. I need you to understand what those people in that room had actually just done. Because from the outside, it might look like a bad meeting, a disappointing afternoon, a setback. But what they had actually done was dismiss someone who had spent 3 years building something they were too arrogant to read the first page of. Let me tell you what was in that business plan they never opened. Nadia had, over the past 2 years, quietly built a network, not a loud network, not a social media following or a public-facing movement, a real, working network of Black women entrepreneurs, bakers, caterers, food producers, and distributors who had been pooling their knowledge, their contacts, and in some cases, their capital. They met monthly. They vetted each other's business plans, they held each other accountable, and over time, 3 women in that group had agreed to come in as silent investors in Nadia's storefront expansion. The funding wasn't a dream, it was already there. It had been there for 6 months. She had also, and this is the part that still gives me chills when I think about it, secured a provisional patent on her signature product line, the sweet potato pound cake, the honey-glazed peach bread, and a preservative-free spice blend she had developed herself. She had worked with a patent attorney, paid for it out of her catering income, and done it quietly, because she understood that the world doesn't protect what it doesn't respect until you force it to. In those catering orders I mentioned, the hospital, the schools, the corporate offices, by the time she walked into Brett's office, she had fulfilled over 40 commercial catering contracts in 18 months. She had a portfolio of signed letters from clients. She had repeat business. She had a revenue number in that business plan that would have made Carol's smirk disappear and replaced it with something much more uncomfortable: recognition. But they didn't open the plan. They saw a black woman in her 40s with flour on her hands, and they made their decision before she finished her second sentence. She went home that evening and made dinner. She helped Kiara with homework. She tucked her daughter Anne and kissed her forehead. And then she went downstairs, made herself a cup of tea, and made one phone call. It lasted 11 minutes. I only know that because she told me later. 11 minutes that set everything that came next into motion. The person she called was a woman named Denise, a commercial property attorney who had been part of her network from the very beginning. Nadia walked her through every detail of the meeting: the interruption, the comment Brett had made to his associate, Carol's remark, the way the business plan had been slid back across the table without a single page being turned. Denise listened without interrupting, and when Nadia finished, there was a pause. And then Denise said, very quietly, "Nadia, what he did in that meeting has a name, and there are codes that govern exactly that kind of conduct in a commercial leasing context." What Brett had done, the dismissal, the commentary, the refusal to engage with the qualified applicant's materials, created exposure under equal opportunity commercial leasing regulations. It wasn't just rude, it was potentially actionable, and Denise was very good at her job. Now here is where I want you to pay close attention, because this is the part of Nadia's story that separates her from every revenge fantasy you've ever heard. She did not go after Brett out of anger. She was not operating from a place of hurt. She filed the formal complaint because it was right, because the next woman who walked into that office deserved to be treated like a human being, because silence is how these things keep happening, and because Denise told her, practically speaking, it would also serve as leverage if Brett's firm ever tried to interfere with her future business dealings in that market. She filed the complaint, she documented everything, and then she let Denise handle it and moved forward, because while the complaint was being processed, Nadia had already pivoted. She went back to her research and pulled up a contact she had found months earlier but never called, a Black-owned commercial real estate firm operating in the next county over, with several properties that matched what she was looking for. She had held off because she was hoping to stay close to her current neighborhood, but now she looked at it differently: a higher foot traffic corridor, a newer building, better parking, and a leasing team that, when she called them the very next morning, answered with a question she had never been asked before in any professional context. They asked, "Can you walk us through your business model?" Not, "Who are you?" Not, "Do you have experience?" They asked about the business. She talked for 40 minutes. They asked sharp, respectful questions. They asked about her patent. They asked about her investor structure. They asked to see the catering client letters. And at the end of that call, they told her they had a property coming available in 6 weeks and they would like to schedule a formal walkthrough. She sat in her car after she hung up and cried, not from sadness, from relief, from the particular kind of release that comes when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone finally treats it like it has weight worth acknowledging. 6 weeks later, she signed the lease. The location was bigger than the one she had originally wanted. Better street visibility, more square footage, a commercial kitchen already partially fitted. It was, in almost every measurable way, a better outcome than what she had walked into Brett's office to ask for. And Brett's office? Around the same time, Denise's formal complaint had triggered a review, and Nadia, it turned out, was not the first. There were others who had come forward once the process was opened. The investigation widened. Brett didn't just receive a reprimand, he lost his license. The firm faced significant regulatory penalties. The thing he had dismissed in 11 seconds, a Black woman with a business plan he never read, had cost him everything he had spent years building. Carol, meanwhile, had backed a competing food venture with another investor group. It launched loudly, spent heavily, and closed within 8 months. The market Nadia had researched so carefully, the customers she knew so well, they weren't interested in what Carol's money had built. They were already talking about something else. They were already in line. The morning Sierra's table opened, the line started before the doors did. She had named the business after her daughter, not as a sentimental decoration, but as a declaration. This is what I built. This is who I built it for. This is the table my grandmother told me to build, and here it stands. The name was painted above the door in warm gold letters, and below it, in smaller text, her grandmother's words, "Put your whole soul in it." The local news came out that first week, not because Nadia had pitched them, but because the neighborhood made enough noise that they had no choice but to show up. The story spread like real things spread. A food writer for a regional publication came in on the third Saturday, ordered one of everything on the display case, sat in the corner for 2 hours, and wrote a piece that described the sweet potato pound cake as the kind of thing that makes you understand why people use the word home to describe a feeling and not just a place. Within 3 months, Ciara's table had a catering waitlist that stretched 6 weeks out. Within 6 months, a regional grocery chain reached out about a distribution partnership, not because Nadia had approached them, but because 3 of their store managers had bought her products personally and brought it to the attention of their procurement team. The patent she had secured quietly, alone, at her kitchen table in the middle of the night was now the legal foundation of a product line sitting on grocery store shelves. She hired 14 women from her neighborhood in that first year, not as a gesture, as a strategy. She wanted people who knew the community, who cared about the product, who would bring the same soul into that kitchen that her grandmother had taught her to bring. Several of those women had never had a job that treated them as full human beings. Nadia made sure every single one of them did. She was expanding to a second location when the message came. It arrived through a mutual contact, carefully worded and indirect. Carol wanted to invest. She had seen the grocery chain deal. She had heard about the second location. She had done what she should have done the first time. She had read the business plan, and now she wanted in. Nadia read the message once. Then she took out her planner, the same one she had carried into that meeting, and she opened it to the back page, to the sentence she had written while sitting across the table from people who had laughed at her. The sentence she had written in the calm that was not peace, but decision. "I will not need you." She wrote that same sentence in her reply. Nothing more, nothing less. And she closed the message and went back to work. I think about that moment more than almost anything else in this entire story, because it would have been easy, so easy, to feel the satisfaction of turning Carol down, to make it dramatic, to make it hurt. But Nadia didn't need to do any of that. The sentence said everything. She had written it before she had a single thing to show for her plan. She had written it on faith, on preparation, on the knowledge of exactly who she was and what she was capable of. And now, on the other side of everything, the disrespect, the pivot, the grind, the opening, the growth, the sentence was still true. It had always been true. She just finally had the building to prove it. There is something I want to say directly to you before this ends. What happened to Nadia was not unique. That room she walked into, some version of that room exists everywhere, in boardrooms and storefronts and hiring offices and family dinner tables. There are people in this world who will look at you and make a decision about your worth before you finish your first sentence. They will see your background and not your blueprint. They will see where you started and not where you are going. And some of them, like Brett, like Carol, will do it with a smile because they have never once in their lives had to fight for the right to be taken seriously. But here's what Nadia's story taught me, and I hope it reaches you the way it reached me. Preparation is silent power. The years she spent studying, building, patenting, networking, nobody saw that. Nobody clapped for it. Nobody posted about it. She did it in the dark, at the kitchen table after the world had gone to sleep. And when the moment came, all of that invisible work became visible, all at once, in a way that couldn't be denied or dismissed or laughed off. Dignity is not weakness. The way she sat in that room and didn't collapse, didn't argue, didn't beg, that was not defeat. That was strategy. That was a woman who knew she didn't need to win the argument in that room because she was going to win something much bigger. And being counted out is not the same as being finished. It is not. Whatever room has laughed at you, whatever meeting you've walked out of feeling invisible, that is not your ending. That is your fuel. Use it the way Nadia did. Go home, go quiet, go to work. Ciara's table is now in 3 locations. The woman they turned away is now the woman they study. And every morning before the doors open, Nadia goes into that kitchen in her building, built by her hands, and she does exactly what her grandmother told her to do. She puts her whole soul in it. If this story moved you, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is in the middle of their quiet years, doing the work nobody sees yet. Tell them to keep going. Subscribe for more stories like this, because every single week we bring you the ones that were never supposed to be told, the ones that matter most. We'll see you in the next one.